Welcome, everyone, to this week's Menlo Midweek podcast. My name is Mark.
And I'm Phil, and I'm back.
Yeah, we're both back.
That's right, dude.
Dude, welcome back.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, man.
I was gone for way less fun reasons than you were.
Yeah.
Mine was like not teaching and schedule.
It's true.
Yours was having a beautiful baby.
Mike is great, man.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I wasn't expecting about parenthood is that this eye no longer wants to open sometimes.
Sure, yeah.
So I'm just permanently trying to make sure that both my eyes are open at the same level because sleep is something that exists kind of, but not all the time.
Yeah, like long stretches of sleep.
Yeah.
And I feel like as a parent, it changes, but now, I have two teenagers and two little boys. Little boys' sleep schedule is pretty set.
Yeah.
But the teenagers, especially if it's not a school night, it's like 11:30 and they're like on our bed wanting to talk. And Alyssa's like, "This is so unique. We should take advantage of the fact that they want to talk." Yeah. And I'm like, I can't stay awake. So
I want to, but I can't.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a long road, man. Welcome to it. It's fun.
It is. Yeah, I'm very excited. And thanks to everyone who sent me some messages while I was out and continually sends Missy and I some encouragement. We need it. Parenting is hard and difficult, but so ultimately fruitful and great at the same time. And it's really great to hear from people on all ends of parenthood, whether it's fresh with us, like we have a couple people on staff right now that have kids within the last year or having a kid within the next couple months, which is cool. And then we have people like Missy's volunteer team who are all in their sunset years talking about grandkids and what that's like. And so it's just so fun, man. It's like a whole different universe.
I'm not dropping any names, but I think somebody might be getting induced to labor today on our staff.
Yeah.
So something's in the water, bro.
Something's in the water, for sure. And Phil, speaking of water, thirsting for truth.
Segway King is back, dude.
Yes. So we kicked off our Cost of Connection series, which you said will take us from now until Easter.
Yep.
So why is this series so long? What's significant about it? And what are we hoping to accomplish over the next 6.5 or 7 weeks?
Yeah. So, this season, which is called Lent for springtime, it's like a thing in church history, the kind of rhythms of the way we think about faith. Easter is a big deal. Christmas is a big deal. And Christmas is one of those times where we kind of expect it because there's so much around us culturally that tells us it's coming, right? You're like, we know it's Christmas in July because it's like, why does Costco have Santa out? Like, there's so many cues that are telling like Christmas is coming because we're commercially incentivized culturally to tell you it's coming. And so that one's a little different. We have kind of 4 or 5 weeks that lead up to it in church world, but Easter is different because you don't have all those same cultural cues.
Right.
You may notice people are wearing pastels or the sun is coming out, but in general, it just feels like a normal time of the year. And so we put a little bit more from a faith tradition perspective into those 40 days leading up to Easter, from what you've maybe heard of Ash Wednesday, kind of marking, a solemn assembly, a personal awareness of your brokenness and sin, the need for a Savior, and the celebration of the resurrection on Easter Sunday. And so, a lot of times you'll see series that we do where it's like, oh, here's the last 7 words that Jesus said on the cross, or here are the final scenes. Sometimes it gets called the Stations of the Cross. We did some emphasis around that last year leading up to it. And then this year, we're looking at specific scenes of Jesus that highlight not only the cost of people in connection to other people, because that's a real cost, but also the cost that Jesus was willing to pay in order to restore relationship for us with him. So it's like a double meaning. And hopefully by the time Easter comes, you're like, oh man, I'm totally ready, and that's why we do stuff like this series. It's why we do parallel content like devotionals, because we're going, hey, we just know that the cruise control autopilot for all of us around this time of the year, it will be easy to forget. It will be easy to drift, and we're trying to help people, just like we just finished talking about in our last series, to live out this counterformation of, I want to continue to abide, continue to stay connected to Jesus in this season.
This might be a little bit in the weeds, but 40 days, number 40 is pretty significant in the Bible. What's the tie-in there?
So it's really a church history tie-in between Ash Wednesday and Easter itself. I don't know that there's like It's a good question. I don't know that there's like some sort of rooted
Significance of 40.
theological
Yeah.
idea. 40 days of Lent history. I do this sometimes where when I'm typing something, I just say it out loud at the same time. And so
I'm sure there's like a dad boomer joke in there somewhere.
yeah. Gemini says that the primary reason for the 40-day period in the story of Jesus is to parallel Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness, found in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There you go. So
Awesome.
thanks, Gemini.
Yeah. Growing up, Lent meant giving something up. That's all basically I equated it with. I mean,
Sure.
Jesus sacrificed. So I was like, okay. So our church would be like, what are you giving up for Lent? And it was usually for me something around TV or video games or something like that.
Right,
What's the tie into that? How did that, was that always a practice that people did during Lenten times?
Yeah, I mean, that's been going on for a long time.
Right.
That sort of became normalized, I want to say like around the Nicene Council stuff, like 300s, something like that, in the 400s. And then it became an official church practice a little while after that. It's taken up different expressions inside of like Roman Catholicism versus Protestantism. There are some people that are Christians that don't have any connection to either the idea of Lent. Like I grew up in a little Baptist church. If you would have said, what's Lent? I honestly wouldn't have known as a kid. We didn't practice that at all.
Huh.
I didn't know people fasted during that. I got no idea. It just
Yeah.
wasn't a part of my tradition. It wasn't until I grew up that I got exposed to those practices. So,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, I think that this idea, certainly when we parallel it to Jesus in the wilderness, right, is this idea of, hey, I'm gonna go without. We talked about it this weekend of I'm going to allow myself to experience physical hunger as a conduit to experience spiritual hunger. And I do think it is a weird cultural phenomenon that we don't ever have to be hungry.
Yeah.
It's weird that we don't ever have to want anything. Actually, like, I think that one of the biggest spiritual distortions for us is that if you're like a professional human, I mean, maybe if you're like, I need a $30 million mansion, yeah, you probably aren't going to get that. But if you're like, I want that physical item, I want that kind of an experience, I want to go do that thing, you can probably do it. I mean, you may be taking on debt to do it, but you can probably go do it. And this might be the first time in the history of the world where like that's true for us, where just kind of get on an airplane, go do something somebody else would have never been able to do before, and you and I can do it without much of a second thought. And how does that spiritually deform us into this idea of like, do I really need God? Is God just there so that I can do what I want and get what I want? And so when I intentionally limit myself, I think God gets a chance in the gap of my desire to show up and go, actually, well, you maybe wanted this possession, you wanted this status, you wanted this thing. It was really just a shadow of something deeper I made you to want. And we know that because even when we get the thing that we want, and we talked about this, we often find ourselves either that thing that we want is only temporarily fulfilling, or that thing that we want is not fulfilling at all, And, it's like it's an interesting thing in like an upgrade culture where you can get the newest thing, right?
Yeah.
Like I know this, you guys got a new car, Missy got a new car. And, for the first few months of a new car, you're like, this is incredible. And you're like, please no one scratch this. And like, please, Micah, don't get sick in it. And, like all the things. And then somewhere along the way, that car, that's the same car.
Yeah.
We even have a term for it, that new car smell, right? At some point, that all starts to wear off, and then it's just a car. Yeah. And I think that's true for so much in our life. And we get addicted to sort of the new car smell of satisfying temporary desires in a way that I think can sort of mask over the deeper desires we're designed to experience.
I've never thought about our 2007 Toyota Corolla having the new car smell.
Yeah, it did at one point.
But it did at one point.
That's
Blew
right.
my mind.
Yeah.
I think that's really funny too, because one of the things that I'm doing as I'm up at all hours of the night now is just scrolling Marketplace to see what hot deal can I get when no one else is up.
Yeah.
So anything from all stuff I don't need
Totally.
to
Yep.
like
Yeah.
a car that I can't afford to some stuff for the car that I have now to a chameleon. I thought it'd be cool to have a chameleon
Sure,
in like a tank that I
Yeah.
would like. Sure, I want one of those. That'd
Yep.
be cool for Micah's room with some plants and stuff.
Sure.
Just wild thoughts that are unchecked at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And then I'll wake up in the morning and look and be like, what was I doing and why was I doing that? But it's because I'm searching for something. I'm searching for whether that's comfort or more sleep, probably.
Right.
And trying to fill that with something that will ultimately not do that.
Right.
And so that's super interesting, Phil. Let's go ahead. Let's jump into your message a little bit more, and then we can go in from there.
Yeah, so we were in John 4. You know, some of the passages that we're in that we'll be in this series are familiar passages if you have regularly been a part of church. And so, we were talking about the woman at the well where Jesus and his disciples, they've been doing ministry. Jesus is exhausted. Disciples are like, we'll go find some food. Jesus hangs back at a well in Samaria, which is already kind of controversial. Normally, Jews didn't relate to Samaritans. They're half Jew, half Gentile. But they go into this town probably because they were in a hurry. And Jesus is resting because he's tired, which is a whole other sermon.
Yeah.
And he has this conversation with a woman that to us is like the conversation almost feels rude. Because Jesus asks this total stranger, hey, can you get me some water? He doesn't have a cup or anything. So she's like, what am I going to put it in? And then Jesus kind of like does the first Jesus juke and is like, well, if you knew what I had, then you would actually ask me for water, because that water you're going to drink and be thirsty again, but the water I give you, you'll drink and be satisfied forever. And she, I mean, like anybody would, is like, all right, I have more questions. And then says, all right, so like
I applaud her curiosity.
Yeah. Like,
because at that point I would have been like, no, I'm good, dude.
Okay,
Whatever you're trying to sell,
I'm out.
I don't need to be underneath this pyramid.
And it's an MLM.
Yep.
You just got to advertise with your friends on
Yep,
Facebook.
yep.
Just trip to Vegas.
Yep.
And so she says, how do I get it? And Jesus, he makes this pivot, but like even him asking her to do it and engaging in a conversation was all countercultural. No one would have been caught dead as a Jewish person talking to a Samaritan person, let alone a Jewish man talking to a Samaritan woman, let alone a Jewish male rabbi talking to a female Samaritan. All of that is countercultural. And then Jesus says, and I think, I talked about that we don't get the tone of Jesus' voice, but I think he says something like, hey, go get your husband. Let's talk about it. And she goes, well, I don't have a husband. And, she's saying it kind of in that way of like, what's the irreducible minimum that I have to admit to keep this conversation moving or to avoid an awkward part of my life? And he said, yeah, you're right. You don't have a husband. You've had 5. And the man that you live with now, he's not your husband. And I don't know the tone of voice. I just know that Jesus always led with grace. Even if there was truth coming, he always led with grace. And I think he led with grace with this woman, and I think his eyes communicated love. And I think sometimes we distort a passage like this, and we make assumptions about the person that we shouldn't make. So the assumptions that I've heard get made about this passage are that like this woman is wildly immoral, and she's like a serial adulteress, constantly stepping out on guys. But actually, women couldn't do that. Like they couldn't initiate divorce under almost any circumstance inside of that culture. On the flip side, literally, if a guy felt like his wife wasn't preparing food correctly, that was a divorceable action. And so she had been given up on by 5 different guys. And then now she's living with a guy that's not her husband. And at least part of that reason is because it would have been dangerous in every definition of that term for her to live as a single woman. Now, can we look at that and go, yeah, but like that's not God's best for her? And all, totally, absolutely, we can say all those things. But let's not turn her into some caricature. I think this story really happened. I think she was really a woman, like an actual literal woman. And I think that Jesus was extending compassion to go, life didn't turn out the way you wanted. And I'm sorry. And it doesn't mean that it still can't. And so Jesus like communicates in that moment to this woman, I know the stuff about you that's the worst. And and I still care about you, and I still want to keep talking to you. And so she like pieces out as the disciples are coming back, and they're surprised that he's even talking to her.
Right.
And she goes and tells everybody in town, like, there's this man up there who told me everything about myself. Like, he knew stuff I haven't told anybody. Come find out. And that's it. That was like the whole story. And so people start coming up, and Jesus sticks around for a couple of extra days, shares like the hope of who he is. Actually, most commentaries will say that this woman is the first person in the Gospels that Jesus says he's the Messiah to, which is crazy. Like when you think about the upside down kingdom of heaven, that this is the first one.
Sure.
And so now this woman believes, and these townspeople believe, and even Jesus' disciples would take years longer before they finally connected the dots. But there was this desperation and spiritual appetite that we see, and this woman who was so concerned about her physical thirst in the matter of just a few moments, the spiritual thirst that she had that maybe she didn't even realize gets met by Jesus.
Yeah. What potential cost to Jesus did this interaction have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Jesus was always, anytime Jesus engaged a group of people that at the time would have been called sinners, we say that like it's just like a throwaway term. For them, it was actually a class of people, it was a group of people. It referred to the type of job you did or to the type of life that you lived. Anytime that Jesus did that, he would sacrifice influence, especially with religious leaders of the day. And if you think about this a little bit like sort of a scale system, as Jesus gained influence with sinners, he lost influence with religious people. And the lower his influence meter got with religious people, the shorter the timeline got before his death.
Yeah.
And you see it like early in his ministry when he would talk to people. This is kind of a unique exception early in his ministry. But when Jesus would perform miracles early in his ministry, he would often tell people, don't tell anyone.
Right.
And I think part of the reason for that was extending out, right? Like, I want public ministry to extend longer. It's not my time yet. He even says that to his mom. Remember when he's turning water into wine? And then near the end, he has arguably like the most influence with sinners and the least influence with religious leaders. And they use sort of that fact to scapegoat him with this group of people in a sham trial to get him killed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for Jesus, you could argue that his willingness to love and engage people that others hated, ostracized, and ignored is what would eventually cost him his life.
Wow. When you're running that through this idea of living out his calling and his purpose to bring part ministry into the world, how do you see that playing out with the people that are listening to this, that are hearing this? It could be then, but also now. I don't think there's any difference there.
Yeah. I think that we all have, it maybe isn't Jew and Gentile, but we all have categories of people that we think this is my kind of person, and then we think like, this is not my kind of person, and we have ways of excusing that. For some people, I think it's, hey, that person on the side of the road that's asking for money, I'm sure they don't need it. I'm sure this is a scam, or I'm sure they could go get a job if they need, Now we can argue about whether or not the most ethical and helpful thing to do is pull over and just hand them money. That's probably not the best path, but I think we sort of anesthetize ourselves to the need, not by doing nothing. We do nothing because we've come up with a story in our head about why we shouldn't and why we should think differently about them. Or maybe it's the person as you're like sitting at a coffee shop and you can tell that person's unhoused and you're like, oh man, I'm telling a story in my head about that kind of person. Or maybe it's the person that votes differently than you. Right. And you think, well, I think I know a lot about what their life story is, what background they come from, what societal privilege they have. That must be why they vote for this person or that person. So I think that type of a thing of like othering people where we go, I don't really have to care about them. Jesus just never did that. He never did that. The only people that Jesus pushed on pretty hard were the religious leaders who should know better but didn't and weren't. And so being able to look at it and say, what are the groups of people, the kinds of people that even if I maybe would go, I don't like the choices that they're making. I would vote differently. I would live differently. I would think differently. Cool, fine. But like, can you still love them the same that Jesus would? Because he did. He thought differently. He would have probably, in some cases, voted differently, right? He
Sure.
definitely lived differently, but he loved them all the same.
Yeah.
And I think what we see modeled by Jesus in doing that and the cost he was willing to pay to do that. It's why when he says, hey, a new commandment I give to you, that you should love one another, which is something they had heard before. Love your neighbor as yourself. He says, love one another as I have loved you. And for them, they're thinking like, oh, Jesus has been really nice to us. He's like walked with us every day. He's performed miracles. He's done this really cool teaching. Like, I get it. All right, I'm going to be really helpful to people. But what they didn't know is that when Jesus said that, he had in mind his ultimate sacrifice. And he's saying, hey, I want you to lay down your life for other people. And it's why he says there's no greater friend than this, than that someone would lay down their life for a friend, right?
Yeah.
And then he says at the same time, hey, the kingdom of heaven, you love your enemies. You pray for those who persecute you. So I think this idea of there's this group of people I get to not really care about, Jesus didn't have that category. And it was very costly to him personally, and he still chose to lean in.
Yeah, that's so good. I think in a lot of ways too, similar to how I was sharing earlier about the things that I'm thirsting for and the ways that can be helpful or not helpful to myself. If I thirst for the things that puts me more in the ways in which mimic Jesus, what I ultimately crave and my appetite will give me things that will actually feed my soul.
For sure.
And so in a world that is so easy to drift to the temporary fix, how can we make sure that we don't get overcome by distractions and that those distractions make us change our brains to think, I don't need to help that person on the side of the road because they're already good.
Yeah. I mean, I think that some of it is determining what boundaries to that comfort we're willing to place on ourselves. Because depending on your life situation, your life stage, your income level, we can basically live a life without limits.
Yep.
And we've talked about this quote before, right? Anything in my life that doesn't have a boundary is an idol. And so for you, comfort is an idol, or that hobby is an idol, or work is an idol, or that relationship is an idol. Anything in your life that doesn't have boundaries, I just think it's probably worthwhile to say, what boundary am I going to give that? And it may need to be an artificial boundary. Some of you, you're like, you don't understand, Phil. I have enough money that I could do this thing forever. Like I don't ever have to stop. It's still an idol. And what does God want you to do? And maybe not getting that next upgrade, not getting that next new toy, not getting the chameleon for Micah's room.
But I really want it, dude. He told me he wants it.
Totally. You do need more sleep then. I think some of that is really important. You know, I've heard of people even at people at Menlo, where somewhere along the way they realized, hey, our righteous standard of living that we feel like God's called us to live is at a certain level, and we are going to be generous with every dollar above that. We're just not going to let it continue to raise the floor of our sort of standard of living. Like we're going to set what that is. And I think there is a sense of contentment that can flow from that, where we just kind of go, man, this is enough, right? I know that, for years, maybe I've told this before, we lived in the Midwest where Alyssa grew up, where I grew up. Alyssa had a deal where she had so many different sweaters that every time she got a new sweater, she made a deal with herself that she had to get rid of an old one. Nice. And so maybe for you, there's something in your life like that where you're just going, where am I going to create limits for myself? Maybe for you, it's like, hey, I know myself enough to know that my rhythms and habits with God are best when I have good sleep, when I have a schedule that's sustainable. And so you go, you know what, I'm just not going to go out and hang out with people more than 2 or 3 nights a week because I know what it will do
Yep.
to the rest of it. But I think it's those, like, what are those keystone habits in your life that will help you avoid feeling like that numbing behavior is the only path? And I think for me, I know the difference almost immediately between what's like numbing self-medication behavior. You know, maybe that's retail therapy for you. Maybe that's drinking a little too much. Maybe that's just checking out with your kids or loved ones in your life. Like, we all can find numbing behavior versus what are healthy and sustainable things that choosing the right answer in the moment may feel tiring, but actually at the end of whatever that thing is, you'll feel better, right?
Yeah.
When the kids go to bed, if I've not like gotten any time on a bike, it is very tiring and sometimes pretty intimidating to be like, I'm gonna go get on the trainer in the garage and log some miles. But by the time I'm done with it, I'm always glad that I did it. And I think that for us to understand what are those healthy rhythms and routines, even if it's hard to continue to do them at times or it takes work to establish those, they are better for me than the numbing patterns that I can otherwise choose.
Yep. I love this perspective on it too, because it's not saying stop all the things in which you're having fun doing
For sure.
and replace them by trying to be more holy.
Right.
It's saying live within limits, and in that margin that you create, be mindful with what you do with that, and invite God into that process to see where He wants you to use that time,
Right.
or how He wants you to use that, emotional energy that you got by not hanging out with people every week. And so, I think that is something that I'm going to be taking away from this for sure, going into these next 40 days. I'm also going to be taking in this idea of how, it's. I kind of hinted at this earlier, but I'm piqued by the curiosity of her being willing to share some deep, hard parts of her life with a stranger.
Yeah.
And how I don't want to share deep, hard parts of my life with my closest friends. And so how when she is a hurting person, invited someone into that, she ultimately sought healing. And healing and restoration was able to happen.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I'm kind of taking away. And what advice or how could you help encourage people that are listening to also receive healing in that same way?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't have somebody in your life that you feel like you can be honest with, I would challenge that assertion a little bit. They're probably, you may not be able to share 100% of 100%, but I think usually a good place to go is like, is there something you can share 100% about, even if it's not everything? Or can you share something about everything? Like, just take a step towards vulnerability with somebody.
Yep.
You may be surprised by what you can get. I also think we do a pretty terrible job in prayer of just nodding. Like, yes, does God know everything? Absolutely. Is it beneficial for us in prayer to name, and I would say when possible, even out loud, everything that's going on? Yes, it's like very helpful.
Yeah.
And so if you're going, I don't know if I have anybody that I could tell him how I'm really feeling, you can definitely tell God. He already knows. And it would be really beneficial for you to even just kind of go, wow, even just like saying that out loud to God and not being struck by lightning or bursting into flames. God can handle it. I've said it. There's a cathartic release. God can show up in a different way because I'm tuning up to what He might do. I think that's helpful. You and I were in a meeting yesterday, and it was we just started the meeting with an exercise where it was, hey, how are you showing up today? It was going to be a very long meeting. So we just did an exercise. How are you showing up today? And the question was in the form of a restaurant and why. Like, what restaurant are you right now and why? And that's one of those things where it's like, hey, I'm not looking for 100%, but I'm looking for something beneath the surface.
Yep.
And I would look for creative ways that you can go beneath the surface. And if you find yourself defaulting to insert weather comment, insert sports team, insert random surface level hobby, just go, hey, what's the question that I could ask that's a little bit deeper than that?
Yeah.
I'm not going like, hey, so thanks so much. Yeah, the weather is getting better. It's so fun. What a cool time to be in the Bay Area. What would you say is your most deep-seated sin? Like we're not jumping to there, but to say like, I know Mark just had a kid. they're adjusting. So it may be as simple as like, hey man, what's been so far the most fun and the most surprising thing about being a dad, right? Like
Yep.
just one layer deeper. And then,
Yep.
hey, can I trust you with that? Can you trust me with that? And it invites the next rung and the next rung. And that's what relationships are.
That's great. Thanks, Phil.
Of course.
Yeah. You want to share a little bit more about what was in that meeting?
Yeah. So we do a series planning day, usually kind of January or February of each year, where we will plan out 12 to 18 months of series concepts for Menlo. So, we know some of them that are going to be, hey, we know Christmas is coming up in December. That is pretty durable, right? We know school comes back in August, kind of when those weeks are. We know Easter's coming up and what those weeks are. And so there's some natural rhythms, but then what are topics we need to be talking about? Where do we believe that God's calling us to go as a church? How do we make sure that teaching fits inside of some of that theme? And so I think it's like a fun meeting to be able to reflect back and thank God for what he has done, learn from some things maybe that we thought were going to work well and didn't. And then we break up into smaller groups. Yesterday was 3 groups. And those groups work for a couple of hours in just building concepts. Hey, here's a series idea, here's a series idea. And now with AI, right, like you can even like create a little image that would be sort of a brand image. And then we come back and have a meal together, and it's like a fun part where each team shares the series ideas with the rest of the group, and we sort of process those together, and then we'll kind of take them from there and work them in, and that's what eventually becomes our teaching direction for the next year or so.
Yeah.
So yesterday, that was most of our day. It was fun.
Fun meeting.
It's really fun. It's like both fueling and draining at the same time. And there's usually, like yesterday, I think half the people in the room had never done it before. So that's always fun too. It's like a cool opportunity to peel the curtain back for people to see it that haven't before. And it was cool. It's a good day.
It was cool.
Yeah.
Fueling and draining reminds me of another thing that we have coming up. And we are going to be draining our energy by running a 5K or walking 1K. And
Yeah.
that will be fueling one of our ministry partners, Mobilize Love.
That's good.
Yes, I'm super excited for that. I've been working with Tim about getting website stuff and videos up, and he has been doing some great work with our ministry partners and getting some other partners as well, like Sports Basement, shout out, who's
Shout
actually
out.
going to be giving all signups or all people who sign up a little gift too, which will be pretty
amazing.
sweet.
Yeah.
So Phil, I run for the Bay 5K is happening at the end of next month. Where are you uniquely, like, how is this? This is a kind of a unique thing. It's not like a typical serving, quote unquote, serving event that we would do. What are some opportunities that lie in something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think for some people, this is like a really cool event because you run 5Ks. And so this is like a one that we're doing for Mobilize Love and trying to just help education services and support for the next generation and underserved communities throughout the Bay Area.
Yep.
So for you, it's like, I love doing this. That sounds awesome. Let's go. I think for some of you, you're like, I would watch a 5K, but I'm not going to run one. I'm not even sure I'm going to walk one. But you could be a great and smiling face to help do it
Oh, yeah.
and volunteer. And then I think there are some other people that you go, I don't know if I'm super pumped about running or walking it, but I guess I'll do one of those. And I have a friend who's like not even a church person, but they love this kind of thing. This sounds great. I'm going to invite them to do it. And they can not only see, hopefully, like normal church people, but also be a part of...
What do you mean by normal church people, Phil?
You know what I mean.
Okay.
Like, hey, these people are normal human beings who go to church.
Got it.
They're defying my expectations
Nice.
in a good
Okay.
way. So I think my hope is that all that stuff, whichever one of those you're kind of tapping into, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and help a little bit. I'm going to run or walk. I'm going to invite somebody. That this becomes something. We did for years. Kind of like a running event, walking event. But over the course of COVID, it got a little blurry where the money was going to each time. and it was basically a virtual event. Like a couple campuses did something in person, but then a couple were, hey, just do it kind of on your own, and here's how to log it. So I think making it a regional, we're all coming together, we're all going to do it together, I think should feel really fun and hopefully really support Mobilize Love.
Yeah, dude. And I'm super excited to have a cap to this one too.
Yeah.
Last time I said I'd run a mile for every person that signed up from online, and I ran a lot of miles.
How many miles was that?
It was 50 something
Goodness.
over the weekend. Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
That was
crazy, bro.
peak COVID, man. Just like
Crazy.
Yeah. All right. Whatever. And I think too, speaking of people exercising their excitement and still getting behind a great cause, there is no reality in which Missy would ever run one of these.
Sure.
But her perfect Saturday would be showing up someplace with a karaoke machine that she'll probably bring herself,
For sure.
rooting people on.
Yeah, 100%.
So there are volunteer signups
Yep.
that Tim has. It's on our website, menlo.church/for-the-bay5K. There's a section over there that says volunteer. There's signups that are specific to certain things. If you want to pass out water, if you want to start at the the start and the finish line. Pretty sure Missy's just going to enter in her own option that says yell at people through my microphone.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's going to be great.
Good.
So we're super excited for that. And yes, like you said, I think it's a great way for us as quote unquote normal Christians, Phil,
That's right.
to help bring our normal friends that might not ever step foot inside of a church, but will say yes to being outside, will say yes to enjoying a hobby like running, or just get behind a really great cause.
Yeah.
And so I'm planning on inviting some of my neighbors. I'd love to encourage you all to do the same. And another thing that could be super helpful for people, speaking of things that are coming up, this one's actually very close to after this episode will air. If you are a parent, we have a parent event coming up very, very soon. This is a parent workshop that we're calling Nurturing Faith in the Home. This is on March 7th. There are still some spots available. And basically, this is a way to talk about faith with your kids, if I'm understanding that correctly. I think Micah's a little bit too young for this one, though, Phil. So, what in your experience is super helpful about an event like this? And why would you encourage parents to, one, come, but also invite parents that they know in their community?
Yeah, I mean, I think being a parent is regularly the whirlwind of survival is what it can feel like when you're just in the thick of it. And it feels that way the whole way through, because even if you have more than one kid, kids are different.
Yeah.
So, what 5-year-old Maisie looked like, who's now 13, is way different than what 5-year-old Wells looks like. Literally different species. And so adapting and understanding, how do I incorporate faith practices into our home? How do I talk about faith in a natural way? That stuff's intimidating. It's hard. And I think sometimes it can feel like, well, wait a second. Isn't that what we have Menlo for, Phil? Like, we bring our kids to church and we drop them off and then we pick them up. I thought you were just kind of taking care of that. Well, what we know of statistically, even now in 2025 with church and TikTok and social media everywhere, is that you are the primary influencer of your kids, period, full stop.
Yep.
And so we want to make sure that you're set up to do that well. And if we can give you some cheat codes for how do you talk about this stuff, what are kids at different ages and stages ready to hear, how can you structure the conversations in the best way possible, we really want to help. Yeah. And so this event will hopefully give you some tangible ways to scale that conversation, to say, what does this look like for my early elementary age child versus my middle school student versus my late high school student. How do I show up well? And maybe this is for your kids, maybe it's for your grandkids, maybe you're just involved in the life of students and you're going, I just want to be better prepared to avoid the pitfalls of what this might look like. This event's for you, and we've made it available, like it's going to happen at every campus simultaneously.
Awesome.
So hopefully that makes it easier for you to participate in just a couple days. We'd love to have you check it out.
Awesome. Well, there's a lot going on. If you need any prayer or encouragement, have any questions, you can text our team, 650-600-0402, or hit that Connect with Us link in the description of this. This takes you to menlo.church/connect, which is your spot for anything that you hear about ever when it deals with Menlo. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful week. Happy Lenten season. We're kicking this off together, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks, everybody.
See you.